System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' in the city left.
Today is Sunday, August 11th. I am Amin TMK for Inner City Left, alongside Inner City Left co-founder Amoja Lil Tanky Sumler. Amoja, we have for the last, 10 days to 2 weeks, I've been wanting to get on here and talk about Russia, Ukraine. It's been one of the biggest stories, if not the biggest story in the world. And it's just so many things popping off here and there. So I'm glad that we get an opportunity to talk about it today. Any thoughts before we get into the nitty gritty, just overall thoughts on what's going on?
Right. It's crazy, right? Like you go to a car dealership and you say, I want this thing, right? And then they oversell you and they're like, oh, this car can do this and this car can do that. And all you need is this, but then they oversell. We get oversold so much that one of the things we really try to do is not oversell anything. The stuff we talk about be deadly freaking serious. Like if we talking about it, it's actually probably a little bit worse than we gonna talk about. You know what I'm saying? And so that's just it, right? Like everything that's been happening with Israel and Iran are so dangerous, they could change civilization. But it's important not to forget that this whole thing that's going on with Ukraine and Russia is something that's so dangerous, it could change civilization, right?
It's like the DC universe, major flashpoints everywhere.
Yeah, right. So it's been at least a week or two since we gave y'all any updates on what's going on in Ukraine. And it's as crazy as it can be right now.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about this Kursk operation. So for the folks who are maybe not know what's going on, Ukraine has pushed into, I guess they call it an incursion, into this Kursk region. But, I don't, they basically, they say it was an intense battle, but the only thing there was military police. So that, that's basically what happened. I want to ask you, a little bit of context and what's your take on this incursion into Russia? Now, this is this is not just, this is Russian territory. This is not a part of the Donbass and the Luhansk or any of that. So, what does this mean?
It's okay. So incursion is a language we can use. A lot of people are using it. Most of what's happening as far as this conflict between the Ukrainians and the Russians is happening in essentially disputed territory, right? There is the People's Republic of Donetsk, which broke away from Ukraine and decided to join Russia. Say what you want about that. I'm just telling you, these are things that happened. Luhansk, all of those areas, right? These are things that happened. Those areas are disputed. Some people say it's part of Russia. Russia says it's part of Russia. The people voted ostensibly to be part of Russia. But, the Ukraine does not recognize it. The EU does not recognize it. And the United States doesn't. That's contested territory. And for the past essentially 3 years since, 2022, so 2.5 years, they've been fighting there, right? In these contested areas. And also, Crimea, which is less contested, right? Like most people have considered it part of Russia since at least 2014. Before then,
they had a referendum.
There was a referendum.
It was overwhelming. Maybe It was a fake election. Why did they have it anyway? It was an election,
right? If fake elections are so easy, why does it?
Anytime an election doesn't go your way, it was faked.
It was fake, right? Yeah. So, but what's happening in Kursk is not that. This is old Russia. This is straight up part of the Russian country. Now, they've had, attacks on Belgorod, which are, again, areas that are not contested. It's straight up old Russia. They fired missiles into it, which is an act of war. But this is something different. Several columns of Ukrainian armor and infantry pierced into actual Russia, took several towns, villages, small villages. More than 3,000 people have been evacuated from this area. And you had cities in Russia with the Ukrainian flag raised. Now, this is something we've talked about a bit on this broadcast because, again, I want you to consider the amount of patience that this is not making excuses. This is just geopolitical reality. The amount of patience that Russia has shown. And if you don't think it's patience, I ask you to consider what would happen if Mexico invaded San Diego, right? And tried to take, something real close, or let's not nothing quite that big, something like Laredo, a small, relatively small American town, right? The Mexican army with tanks and infantry crossed the Rio Grande and established military checkpoints, started calling the people that lived in the city, saying, this is your government. These are things that happen. The Ukrainian officers, ostensibly Ukrainian officers, called the people that lived in the area and set out panic, made these people flee from their homes. These are not soldiers. These are regular people that lived in these Russian villages. And so all of these people, of course, the government's telling you to leave. They all hop in their car and they leave. So they clog up all of the highways and the transportation zones, right? Where the Russian military is now trying to rush in to restore order in these places. The fact that this has been a red line for Russia for a long time, something that literally could lead to a nuclear exchange, right? Because this is, as they say, a bridge too far. The Ukrainians, now again, have they taken a lot of territory? Not at all. But they were in Russia, and it seems as if they were trying to make it to one of the nuclear power plants in Russia, right? Draw your own conclusions from that. Again, you can't really make a weapon from the kind of, nuclear materials that are at a plant, but you can cause a catastrophe, right? But it seems like they were not able to make it there. But again, 3,000 regular Russians were forced to leave their homes. And Ukrainian flags were put up in these areas. It's an incredibly provocative act. I
want to ask this because as we keep up with Russia and Ukraine pretty extensively, and I just want to acknowledge, like, Ukraine has been, I don't want to say, losing is even, I don't think, as a proper term. They are getting routed everywhere you go. There's no opportunity for them to push back in a way that, helps their cause or may help negotiations. We've seen Israel kill the top Hamas negotiator just to sort of say, like, we don't want negotiations. Doesn't this sort of feel like the same thing for the Ukrainians who have sort of been like, oh, well, maybe peace agreement is good? Is this sort of like the same thing, or how do you view it that way?
I see it exactly the opposite, right? I see it exactly the opposite. Ukraine understands they have nothing that they can negotiate with. They're not winning anywhere. They don't hold any Russian territory. They're getting destroyed everywhere. So and my theory is they wanted to get to the power plant, and then they would have a huge bargaining chip with Putin, right? Like, hey, look, you give us back the Donbass, we'll give you back there won't be no problem. Ain't no telling what could happen. These power generators, they're really old. That's a much better negotiating place than where they are right now, right? This does allow them, if the negotiations began at this very second, to have that. But it looks already like this incursion has been stabilized. And so they have what's called a bloom, right? There are troops that are there, but they're surrounded on all sides by the Russian military, right? Here's something else that's really disturbing to me about this, though, right? When we're talking about how dangerous it is in this American moment, who gave the order? Not to go Godfather with it, but who gave the order that it was okay for Zelensky not to use this American military tech, Italian military tech, NATO military tech, right? Not in self-defense, but on offense, to actually go inside. Because this is literally what Russia's been talking about since the 90s. If we allow a NATO member on our border, one day NATO will invade Mother Russia proper. Well, Ukraine just did that. They just did it, right?
And I think, but to your point, I think, like, this is the time of, like, this is the season for pushing at red lines. I mean, everybody right now, Israel has become a great habitual line stepper. And now we have Ukraine, I think, just following right along on that habitual line step.
Because there's no one to tell them no, right? This is what I'm alluding to. The Biden presidency is a lame duck presidency that no one respects or fears anymore. I mean, it's so sad that this is the joke that Donald Trump continues to make because he's not wrong. Like, Russia is being invaded right now by someone that wants to join NATO. And over the weekend, you see the photos of the president of the United States just lounging at the beach like there's nothing to be concerned about. Like nothing bad could possibly happen from this, you know? So we don't know if Biden gave the authority. We don't even know if Biden knows this is happening. We just don't. We don't have any idea how in the loop he is in his actual White House.
And this is why everyone has to be culpable because since no one knows who's pulling the trigger, I just assume it's everyone's okay with it.
Right.
Because there's no pushback. You never hear Kamala, you don't see Joe Biden anywhere. He's disappeared from the world.
Right. The highest up that I've been able to find is the Pentagon spokesperson said that it was approved. Said that it was Ukraine was, but again, right. So what are the implications of that for a member of the Pentagon to say they approved the utilization of these American weapons in Russian territory? That's an act of war.
Should be something that the Congress would have to go through. Do you remember this time
or
in American
the president?
History? Yeah, but there used to be a time in American history where if you wanted to attack a country or declare
Congress
war on them,
declare war. Right.
What happened to that? I mean, it just goes back to this idea.
It's still there. It just never happens, right? Congress did not declare war on Vietnam. Congress did not declare war on Congress did not declare war on Iraq, at least not for Desert Storm, right? And we attacked them way before there was a declaration of war, which ironically, famously, Joe Biden voted for the authorization of force, right? So that at least the second Gulf War was voted on by Congress. But yeah, I mean,
I get what you're saying. Like, I get what happened. I understand the historical context. My real question is, how come in the United States, a place where it's supposed to be, if you go to war, you have to go through Congress, that is not even a part of the culture anymore. There is not even a discussion amongst the rest of the Congress members. I mean, you may have people who are like sort of on the MAGA side that possibly want to build up some sort of we're here for America first. We don't need to send money to Ukraine. But, other than that, there really doesn't seem to be any pushback.
And to your point, at least when it wasn't Congress, it was the president of the United States of America saying, I am doing this thing, right? Joe Biden is the one who authorizes these strikes in Yemen. That is him. He is saying, I am okay. He puts his name on a little piece of paper and then bombs fall somewhere, right? That is not happening. Ostensibly, that is not happening in this Ukraine conflict at this point. There's nothing on paper. And the United States wants to play it cute that way, right? Like, well, we didn't know that they were going to invade like the same way they did with Israel. We didn't know they were going to assassinate them.
I mean, it's just like, how like Reagan went with the mistakes were made. Or we went through all. It wasn't Reagan, but it was lots of people that used it. Now a spokesperson says it was authorized.
Right, and from the Pentagon. Not even the Department of State.
There's no accountability. A spokesperson,
it's not the Joint Chief of Staff, right? You see what I'm saying?
A spokesperson says it was approved. That's a nothing burger.
Approved by who? Right? These are my questions. Who said
mistakes were made?
Say it was okay?
By whom?
Right.
By whom? I mean, it just goes to the language of the American government is just ubiquitous. It doesn't say anything. It just use this polite language. We watch this with the UN all the time. It's just rhetoric. Yeah. As we continue to escalate and further escalate this war in Ukraine. I want to read this because, we were talking about this earlier when we first saw this, incursion, I'm just using that language, whatever you want to use. German newspaper military analyst Julian Rupke, I'm not even going to pretend that I said that right, warns, don't be deceived about the successes of the Ukrainian forces in the Kursk operation. And I said this when we were watching the military summary channel. I'm like, how are you going to be able to push into this land and hold it? Now, like you said, we saw that they were looking to get to that power plant. But again, as Brent Fayez said, that was a high hope. And it seems like regardless of what they want to do, the risks continue to get higher and higher. And this was just a high risk play. We also watched Brian Berletic talk about how this is going to further the decline and, the military force in Ukraine. I wanted to know, do you agree with those statements?
Yeah, because again, you don't have an infinite amount of troops, right? So let's say that they use 5,000 troops, right? Which is about the estimate that I'm seeing. So first off, that tells you you're not serious. You went into Russia with 5,000 troops. What are you going to do with that? But they did.
It's like a guerrilla force,
Right. And that's what it was. Mostly it was Ukrainian special forces and Ukrainians regular force, right? Not the reserves. Right. This is their regular army. So these were supposed to be their best troops that they sent for this. And it's hard to see it as anything other than a suicide mission because 5,000 troops. It's not 5 million troops. Napoleon's Grand Army was hundreds of thousands of men. It was nearly 1 million men that he went into Russia with. And he was not. Do you think Zelensky is smarter than Napoleon?
Go to Inner City Left. I don't know if you can see this. It's a picture of Hitler and Napoleon, and it's like, and it says, because the tweet says, it seems shockingly easily to invade Russia. It seems shockingly. It's not easy. It's not an easy
easy to invade. It's just not easy to make it home alive. And that's why I say, these guys are sent look, the smarter thing to do, if you're not going to sue for peace, take all that new tech, take all these trained up men, send them to the front, relieve your soldiers that are pressed in. Places like where is it? The great Klingon Chasiv Yar, right? I joked that it sounds like Klingon City, right? Send them to relieve
or New York,
right?
New York,
right? Send them to
New York,
free
Ukraine,
and
by the way, for those
force Kharkiv. Yeah, right, exactly, right. Don't. It sounds like Gollum talking to the hobbits. Don't give it to him, man.
Yeah.
You're taking 5,000.
And you got to feel bad as a person who is living and dying trying to protect these parts of, Chasiv Yar, whatever it may be, New York or any of these areas. And, you're doing all of these calculated retreats because you don't have enough men. And you just see 5,000 people with brand new equipment invading Russia for a pointless mission that has a very low chance of working, and they're going to feel the brunt of it because, what is there, in your opinion, going to be an escalation on Russia's side? We've heard from different officials saying there will be. What are your thoughts?
Look, I always like to go to Medvedev, right? If you think that Putin is the scary person, you really should look into some of the other Russian politicians to understand.
Oh, there's other Russian politicians?
There are other Russian politicians.
I thought he was king.
Right? There is a Russian Security Council. Everybody has to talk about these kind of things.
Didn't Russia have all these oligarchs? You don't think they have an opinion on what happens in the government?
They get to say something, right? Do you think Bezos don't have a say? You know what I'm saying? In America, he's not elected, but to the point, right? Medvedev has moved away from the language of special military operation now. When you read what Medvedev was talking about, he's talking about destroying Ukraine. To him, he's specifically said this was a bridge too far. This was a red line they crossed, and we continue to see that. That's where the Iranians are, right? The West just there's nothing is sacred. There's nothing they won't do to win. You know what I'm saying? And it's desperation because 2 years ago, the United States State Department didn't want to fund the Azov brigade, not openly, because they acknowledged that their Nazi backgrounds, not a metaphor, made it a little bit difficult to square that, giving them these kind of weapons. Those bans are gone.
That happened about 3 months ago. Yeah. Again, Anthony Blinken. Yeah, Anthony Blinken was, there, keep on rocking in the free world, and there was not Z. Right. Not Z's, paraphernalia all over the wall. It was not Z Bennigan, TGI Fridays or whatever, Ruby Tuesday. It was all
real life
memorabilia. Real life menu. I mean, these are Banderites. I mean, it's like literally in the name.
They're Banderites.
It's not, it's like the whole thing was like, keep it real. You can't even keep it realistic. There's an incredible amount of proof that shows that these people are some of the worst people, bottom of the barrel type humans. And they're the ones that are pushing, they're the ones that are willing to, because they have a deep hatred of Russia. They're the ones that are willing to do this in the United States. Again, Lindsey Graham, you can go right back to him. We are killing Russians with Ukrainians. We're not dying. So what difference does it make?
But you could, right? I mean, what happens, right, as it gets harder and harder for people like Putin, who are essentially moderates in the Russian process, to quiet the voices of the Medvedevs who want to see bigger and greater action. You know, it's like they don't understand how much Russia is holding back its power. Because I say this again, they don't have to do this at all. They have more than enough nuclear weapons, tactical, strategic, every version you can imagine, submarine launched, aerial launched, missile based, right? They could blink tomorrow every Ukrainian city out of existence. Every time you find out that you wake up and Kyiv has been hit by another missile strike, which, by the way, happened again just last night, just remember, almost all of these missiles they're sending can be nuclear tipped, and they haven't. Right. And this is what I'm saying. It gets harder and harder for the moderates in this process to hold back the string, because people like Medvedev will be able to say legitimately, we have grandmas now that are being preyed upon. We have old people that are not part of the military. They're not part of the Russian government. They just live on these border towns and they're being exploited. Who's going to protect Russia? America always talks about finding dissenting voices, but what they don't assume is that those voices are actually more hawkish. They always assume they're more dovish, and they're not. Yeah,
they think they're more like closer to like American values or like capitalism, when in fact the party that got the second amount of votes, the second most amount of votes in Russia was the Communist Party.
The Communist Party of Russia, right? Do you guys want to see the CCCP? I mean, keep going, right? I mean, and that's the reality. You end up in this place where the people, if you were to get what you claim you want the most, regime change, it would be once again blowback, because the kind of person that would be able to take power at this point would not be a moderate. That's the only thing that you could do to dislodge. America and the West needs to face that. The reality is Putin is the last of the great negotiators as it comes to dealing with Russia and the West. Whoever comes next is not going to negotiate. Not at all. Because Putin. If Putin has proven any one thing with the West is the West will not honor whatever you negotiate about.
Not only that,
one inch.
Yeah, not only that. I mean, we see that the United States is getting worse and worse at pulling coups. I mean, just got to call a spade here.
Right.
I want to give a shout out to our podcast listeners, wherever you find podcasts. If you watching us on YouTube, give them subscribe, do the things. We've been getting a lot of love from our Instagram community, but if you know us from YouTube and you're not on Instagram, follow us at Inner City Left. I want to give a shout out to our Patreon members. Big shout out to Kelly, Dubsy22, Nicole, J Goulart 94, No Ground, RK, Paula, Alyssa, Lauren, Suzette, Dennis. Without y'all, what would we do? We'd be lost. Moja, thoughts, feelings, anything we missed before we move on, get out of here?
Man, I just would really like to see the president come out and make a strong stand one way or the other. Will there be war? Will there not be war? Right? Will there be war? Will there not be war? Because this is something the president needs to make a decision about. I don't want to see some career bureaucrat deciding whether or not war with Russia is what comes next.
It'll just be a spokesman that said it was authorized. For Emoji Little Tanky Sumler, I am Amin TNK, Inner City Left, and peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.